What is up? Welcome to another PFF podcast. I'm Mike Renner. Joining me on Monday, May 22nd here is Sam Monson. And the big news of the day, Sam just found out he's got a visa. He can come to America. They're allowing him in the country. Don't know what the hell we're thinking. But Sam, you got to be excited, right?
I'm in. I may find a way of screwing it up before now and actually getting there, but for the moment it looks like I'm in, pending many forms to be completed, many people to be talked to, many stamps to be put in passports, and then I can actually get over there.
I was going to say, hopefully they don't find your old message board accounts that we know you were famous for, because that might keep you out. But yeah, I'm going to say I'm not going to get too excited. I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch because there might be some skeletons in your closet. They may not let you in, but up until this point, looking like good news. So finally got that done. Excited to have you come over. But let's get right into some football. People don't want to hear about our lives. They want to talk football. Slow offseason per usual, but we'll get to some scheme talk later. We'll get to some quarterback rankings later. But right now, what I'm burning on, what's making me really upset in this offseason is the fact that the Chicago Bears are flipping their guards for God knows what reason. I explain this to me, Sam.
Well, that was the story to me. I mean, I can see it working out fine. I can see both these guys being perfectly capable on the other side of the line that they're playing at the moment because Josh Sitton, for one, has done it before. He's been a very good right guard, moved to left guard, and was perfectly good there. So I don't see Sitton being a problem. I don't see a reason Kyle Long would struggle on the left side, but I don't see why you would do that. I mean, you've got Josh Sitton, who's arguably the best. No, screw it, not arguably. He is the best pass protecting guard in the NFL, and proven on the left side. You've got Kyle Long, who's proven to be a very good guard on the right side. I mean, I don't see the logic for why you switched sides. What possible benefit is there in doing that?
Did they even say why? Like, did they say, we think Kyle Long's better there, or is it just, we're going to do this and see how it works out? Like, did they give any line of reasoning for it, or is it just
seen a good line of reasoning? I think that I don't even know that they've announced it. I think this has just appeared in how they're running things and it's being reported. I don't think they've kind of come out and said, this is what's happening, this is why it's happening. It's just, this is the status quo now. We're flipping the guards and nobody actually has a clue why.
This is one thing that's a big pet peeve of mine that's ground my gears for years now, is when teams flip sides with offensive linemen because of the supposed rationality of the left side being more important for pass protection reasons, even if that may not be the case. If you go back and read Steve Palazzolo's groundbreaking study from a few years back about where pressure actually comes from, how much it actually matters, how much it actually leads to forced fumbles. There's really no difference between left and right side in the NFL. Yet we still see this sort of mindset. Guys like Tyron Smith have flipped from right to left side, and usually people take a step back. Usually it's not the same position. There's completely different footwork, completely different hand usage when you flip sides. It's not like going from shooting a basketball right-handed to left-handed, but it's not just like it's not like the same position altogether. It's definitely different, and we've seen guys struggle doing it. So to me, it makes no sense.
No, I mean, I don't get it at all. The thing that you were saying about, switching sides in terms of pass protection, again, that's a reason why it shouldn't happen, not why it should happen. A guy like Josh Sitton, like we said, just doesn't allow pressure. He's the best pass blocking guard in the game. So if there's anybody that you want to keep on the left side, it's Josh Sitton. I mean, okay, he only played 700 snaps last year, but he didn't allow a sack, he didn't allow a hit, allowed 6 total pressures. Those are ridiculous numbers for a guard. Even if you extrapolate them out over the season, you're still under double digits in terms of total pressures. You're not allowing the quarterback to hit the ground at all. That's the guy you want on the left side if that's your rationale for it. It's an interesting one because I really don't see a reason why it would happen. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that's a big point that you bring up, that when you talk to offensive linemen, it's a bigger deal than just changing them positions, giving them a week to get used to it, and job done. You're talking about some guys who have played the entirety of their careers on one side of the line or not, and you're suddenly asking them to completely reverse the way they do everything. It's a far bigger deal in some guys' eyes to go from left to right side or right to left than it is to go inside to outside, because at least you're still doing things the same way. It's left foot back every time, as opposed to, hang on, I have to completely reverse that. So yeah, it's difficult to find a good analogy for what exactly it is, whether it's the left-handed basketball shot, that kind of thing. But I think it is a more significant change than a lot of people want to think, that you just moving the right side, moving the left side. It's the same position. It's not a big deal. For some guys, it is a very big deal. I think some guys can do it fine, and you don't even necessarily notice a decline. Some guys takes a little bit longer for them to get used to it. But you're going to get guys that are ridiculously right-handed or ridiculously left-sided, whichever one it is, and they don't make that switch. It's a real big problem for them. It's not something that they may ever get capable of doing. So when you get two guards in Sitton and Kyle Long who have proven to be quality on their respective sides, I just don't see why you would mess with that.
No, we're definitely on the same page here. And, well, we'll see what happens come this fall. The other big news in the NFL came out today that Kirk Cousins, they've set a deadline of July 15th for a chance at a long-term deal, and it looks like the report was less than 50% chance of a long-term deal actually getting done between Kirk Cousins and the Washington Redskins. So, Sam, if you're the GM of the Washington Redskins or whoever makes the decisions thereafter, we have no clue what's actually going on in the front office. What do you do? What do you do with Kirk Cousins at this point, knowing he probably doesn't want to be there?
That's your biggest problem, is that the organization has become such a mess that your quarterback doesn't want to be there, even if you want him to be there, which it still isn't clear that they do want him. So you've got part of your problem is that you've spent so long dithering and making up your mind about whether he's the guy or not that he's become disillusioned with the whole thing and has taken from that you don't want him. Now, that probably changes if you reverse up a dump truck load of cash to his front door and say, this is what you get for the next 6 years. I imagine that would change your opinion of
Sometimes,
how much they desire.
That usually helps. Yeah.
But it does indicate that, this has become an issue, how long you spent messing this guy around. Because if anything, he's gotten better over the time you've been deciding whether he's the guy or not. And, if you're still not sure whether he is someone you can go forward with, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's a lot like the Tyrod Taylor situation in Buffalo, where he may never become Aaron Rodgers, but not many people are going to. So at some point you have to draw a line in this hierarchy of quarterbacks and decide anything above this line is somebody we can work with long term, and we just have to pay that money, the starting quarterback money to, and anyone below this line we've got to cast aside and start looking for somebody new. And anywhere you draw a line, I would think both Kirk Cousins and Tyrod Taylor have to be above that line, at which point you just have to suck it up, pay them the exorbitant amount of money it takes to keep a quality starting quarterback around, and get on with building a roster around them that can compete.
Yeah, I have no clue what they're actually offering Cousins in terms of years and money, but things have to be just awful there for him not to want to stick around, considering the fact that this is a top 10 offensive line around him. This is a top 10 probably receiving core around him. That's about, that's a pretty cushy situation. If you're a quarterback in the NFL, you're going to put up good stats in that offense, even if you're not necessarily an, elite type of quarterback, like I think we've seen from Kirk Cousins. So for him to want to leave that, for him to be willing to leave that for a place like maybe San Francisco, somewhere without talent, they must be either be incredibly far apart in money wise, or just that front office has just become so toxic no one wants to be there.
And I guess the other problem is that because you've been messing this around for so long and been playing on the franchise tag, it's kind of, I would suggest it's probably spoiled him a little bit in terms of contract expectations. So, before you were messing around with this, $20 million a season was kind of the benchmark for top quarterback money and the kind of Peyton Manning contract and that sort of thing. he's now been averaging more than that for the past 2 seasons because he's been playing on the franchise tag. So he's going to earn $24 million this year. So if you're rolling into an extension, in 2018 saying, look, this is what we want to give you for the next 6 years, you're not going to be able to come in and kind of try and average him out at like $18 million a year because it's a pay cut of like $6 million a year now. So by your indecision of trying to play the short-term game and see if he is actually the guy, you've actually priced yourself out of the contract market.
Yeah, what would interest me to see is obviously what if a deal did get done, if they did have a trade in place, what would it look like? What would someone give up? What would you give up right now for Kirk Cousins if you are, say, the 49ers? If you are a team desperately in need of a quarterback, don't have one, have maybe a young roster that's not willing to compete right now but could in a few years, what are you going to give up to get a guy like Kirk Cousins?
And I think they have a similar kind of problem in that your issue now is how much it's going to take to lock him down to the contract. So, if you could get Kirk Cousins on, if he was already signed up to a team-friendly long-term contract, I would think he would be worth a pretty decent haul in terms of trade value. A first-round pick plus some goodies, even if he's not, even if he's not this Aaron Rodgers quarterback that everybody wants. He is good enough. He's good enough to win games. He's good enough to win a championship if you're capable of surrounding him with the right roster. And if he was already locked into a decent contract, he would be well worth going after for a team that just hasn't been able to find one of those guys. But now you're talking about you've got to pay that to get him, and then you probably have to sign him to a market-setting contract because of what he's on now. So you're talking about giving up a first-round pick plus extra stuff, and then signing him to a contract that exceeds Andrew Luck's deal or Aaron Rodgers' deal or something like that. You're going to be talking about a $25 million season contract because he's the next big quarterback to come up and he has all the leverage. So that, I think, is what makes that a really awkward thing. It'd be one thing if a team just had to pay the trade consideration and then already had him in terms of a long-term deal, but you've got to pay that, and then you've got to pay what is clearly more than he's worth. Kirk Cousins, as we said, is better than the threshold of quarterbacks you need to be, but at no point in his career should he be setting the marketplace for quarterback contracts. But that's the kind of reality of this ridiculous quarterback market in today's NFL.
Yeah, I'm not sure he necessarily exceeds someone like Andrew Luck at 24.5 a year, but I think he definitely is going over Aaron Rodgers at 22 a year. I think what he's at right now, his franchise is just a shade under 24 million, and he's probably asking for about 24 million a year. So at the end of the day, I just think the Redskins have to sack up and do it. I think you have to sign this guy because your roster is that close to being a Super Bowl contender. All you need to do is fix the other side of the ball. The offense has been good enough to win you a Super Bowl. That other side of the ball, the defense has not been. Obviously, if you improve there, you will contend in the NFC East every year with the Cowboys and whatnot. They really need to fix that defense, and I think you're close enough that you need to keep a franchise quarterback like Kirk Cousins around, because if you ditch Cousins, you're still a good enough roster where you're not getting a top 5 pick next year. If you ditch Cousins, you're still getting maybe like a top 10 to 20 range, which isn't going to net you a franchise guy. So you're kind of behind the 8 ball for a while if you were to part ways with Cousins.
Yeah, the very minimum I think they need to be doing is trying to re-sign him long term. Now maybe they are so far apart in contract terms that they're not going to be able to get it done, and they need to move to plan B or C, which is try and ship him in a trade. But plan A, I think, has got to be re-signing this guy, because it's, again, like the Tyrod Taylor thing, you're just not going to do better. There are better guys out there, and in theory you can get one of them, but the chances of any guy coming along the immediate time you need him and being better than a Kirk Cousins from even year 1, 2, it's not going to happen. I mean, sure, there's a chance, but no, forget it.
Yeah, I am 100% on board with you. I think we agree that you just need to sign him if you're the Redskins, unless you get a real sweet deal with 2 to 3, even more than what the Broncos got for Jay Cutler back in the day, multiple first round picks. I think you need to keep that guy as your starting quarterback. Let's move on. Let's keep it moving, though, to what I alluded to in the intro with you wanted to talk about the Carolina Panthers and what they can do with Christian McCaffrey and Curtis Samuel, just in terms of creativity in that scheme. And you wanted to hit on just some of your favorite schemes around the league. So let's first dive into the Carolina, though. Last year, they ran a good deal of I was banging the drum for, even these past 2 years, for Mike Shula and the job he's done there in terms of creativity with Cam Newton in the running game, creativity with their wide receivers and whatnot in terms of their splits, how they use them in different roles. And I just think that when they drafted McCaffrey, that was an absolute perfect fit from him in terms of their running scheme mirrors a lot of what they did at Stanford for McCaffrey, and the fact that Mike Shula is willing to use guys in different ways to maximize their strengths. So what do you see from them making McCaffrey and Samuel back-to-back picks there late in April in the draft? What do you see them being able to do, and what do you think their plan will be for the two of them?
Yeah, we talked before the draft about McCaffrey didn't need to land somewhere that was prepared to get creative, but if he did, the potential impact he has improves by, an order of magnitude. It's a giant extra factor in what he can bring to an offense. And I agree with you. I think Carolina is a brilliant place for him to land because they've proven they'll get creative. They're willing to do stuff that most NFL teams aren't to make the most of the talent that they have. Now, part of that is having a freak like Cam Newton, and he allows you to do things that other quarterbacks can't, or that you wouldn't trust other quarterbacks to do, because he's just a different physical body type to anybody else. We've seen big quarterbacks before. We've seen fast quarterbacks and athletic quarterbacks. We haven't really seen anyone that has all of it together the way Cam Newton is. I mean, he really is just a kind of supersized athlete. It's like someone has taken a regular athlete and just put 130% in there, and just ramped them up size-wise.
Yeah, it's like creating a player in Madden, and all of a sudden you're just like, let's make him a little bigger than.
Yeah, let's just crank him up to 130, 140%, and that's what you're seeing. You've got a guy who's able to move like a 210-pound guy, but he's the same size defensive ends. It just shouldn't be possible. So, like that allows you to do things that other teams just couldn't do. But they've at least embraced that, and they've gone kind of out of their way to make sure that they're able to make use of it. So, I think getting McCaffrey was a big get in round one, but coming back and getting Curtis Samuel and double dipping on that, I think shows real intent for what they want to do on offense, because the thing that I think both these guys do is bring this position flexibility that makes it a real problem to match up with as a defense. So if you think what you can do with McCaffrey, not just use him out of the backfield as a standard kind of receiving option, and he's a great catcher of the football, he's a great route runner, he's a great threat after the catch, so all that stuff is good, but he's, I think, perfectly capable of playing legitimate wide receiver. I mean, you could split him out at wide receiver, have him run wide receiver routes or slot routes, and have, a perfectly good player there. So what you've potentially got is a guy that can line up essentially anywhere on offense, and you don't know where he's going to be before the huddle. So when you're a defense, you see these guys come out into the huddle and you think, okay, when you see most guys, you think, okay, Jonathan Stewart's coming out. We need a linebacker there to cover that from a personnel standpoint. When McCaffrey comes out, you don't know that, because you might need a linebacker if he lines up in the backfield in I formation. You might need a defensive back if they split him out as a left wide receiver or a slot guy. And that creates real stress on a defense, because you need a guy that can cover any of those things. And Samuel, I think, is a similar kind of guy, albeit not quite as versatile. I don't think he could be an every down running back, but he can do it occasionally. He can do the kind of Percy Harvin, motion him into the backfield, give him a carry kind of deal. And that's in and of its own right. Then you think about combining the two of them, and suddenly you've got two guys that you need to think about being able to line up anywhere. And it just creates these absolute matchup nightmare issues for a defense, because most defenses don't have one of those guys that can cover both those things. And the teams that do, guys like Arizona with Tyrann Mathieu, they only have one of them. So even if you've got one guy that can go man to man against Christian McCaffrey and hold up, you don't have two of them. You don't have anyone that can account for Curtis Samuel. So when you add those two guys to Cam Newton, who already we talked about, you don't have anyone that can match up with him. I mean, this entire offense is just stacked full of people that the defense can't go one-on-one with.
Yeah, I especially liked the Samuel pick going back to back with these guys because of what they lost basically with Ted Ginn. Without Ted Ginn, this was probably the most unathletic receiving core, in the NFL. I think the most athletic, pure receiver outside of Ginn on that core last year was probably Greg Olsen. Greg Olsen's probably more athletic than any of the other wide receivers that they had. Guys like Devin Funchess, Kelvin Benjamin, who were actually seeing playing time. They needed someone to replace what Ginn gave them, which was someone who can stretch the field, someone who can, actually stress the safeties instead of just being able to play, just having all these possession type receivers who limit what you can do offensively. So I think they needed that, and Samuel brings that immediately. He ran a 4.31 at the combine. He has that sort of speed to challenge that, and then
faster than Ginn, by the way.
And then he also is a legitimate running threat as a wide receiver in terms of jet sweeps, end arounds. They did a good deal of that again last year. He averaged almost a carry a game, and that just adds another thing, like you said, that defenses have to worry about. You have to prepare for now all these different options that they can do with McCaffrey and Samuel, that you're just wasting your time basically as a defense preparing for those things to how to defend them. Because if you don't prepare for them, you're going to look like an idiot when they run an end around and no one's there on the backside to, contain Samuel. So you have to prepare for him, but you're just wasting time as a defense when if they didn't have a guy like Samuel, the defenses wouldn't have to prepare for it, and you would just prepare for this big, large receiving core with no real downfield threat. Now I think they have all these weapons offensively that basically anything Mike Shula wants to dream up, he can do.
Yeah, I'm an absolute huge fan of it. I'm really excited to see what they're going to do. The other thing I think that's very encouraging is that they've talked openly about watching a ton of college tape this offseason to try and figure out how to use these guys and how to use more than one of them at the same time. And not just a case of, looking at Stanford tape to see how McCaffrey was used and looking at Ohio State tape to see how Curtis Samuel was used, but looking all around college, because college is stacked full of these guys that are just offensive weapons, and they're much better than the NFL is at just figuring out a way of using these guys, as opposed to trying to shoehorn them into a kind of a traditional NFL position. And if they can't do that, it's a problem as opposed to something to actually work with. So I think it's encouraging that they've been kind of scouring the college landscape and trying to figure out how best to incorporate these two guys at the same time.
Yeah, that I'm definitely excited to see what Carolina does coming off of, a bad year for them offensively, where Cam Newton was all over the map with his accuracy. But that NFC South has a lot of offensive firepower now. And I was going to get into some schemes around the league, that other ones that we liked, and I kept going back to other teams in the NFC South, and the number one on my list was Atlanta, but that was with Kyle Shanahan. So I'm not exactly sure how they're going to deal with him leaving, but last year that to me was the best, the most effective, the most like ahead of the curve type scheme that I saw in all the NFL.
Yeah, why don't you? So, well, I've got one of these as well. A team that the reason for their scheme is now elsewhere. So it'll be interesting again this year to see where they are. But talk a little bit. Why don't you break down what it is about Kyle Shanahan's offense that is so effective? Because everywhere he goes, he has a notable jump in quarterback performance, and it's an offense that does seem to get ridiculous production.
My favorite thing about his offense is that it all kind of fits together. There's not like he's shoehorning, like you were saying, they're shoehorning like the Rams did with Tavon Austin. They kind of just added these, they look creative plays on paper, but it's not actually within the flow of the offense, these jet sweeps or whatever you're running to him. It doesn't fit naturally with what they do offensively. Everything in the Falcons offense kind of plays off of each other. So these certain, and that plays itself out in the play action game, which they were unbelievably effective at last year, and they used it more than anyone else in the NFL. the stretch play action plays and the way that they use the weapons like Taylor Gabriel and Julio Jones in effective ways. They ran Gabriel a ton on just straight go routes or straight, fly down the field routes where you needed nothing but raw speed to run the routes he was running. It wasn't creative in terms of he needs to make a move to get open. It's just basically if the defense didn't account for him and didn't account for his speed, he was going to be open and going to make a big play. But if the defense did account for him, then all of a sudden he was shut down. But it's basically using guys in roles that best fit their skill set. And I think that's what Kyle Shanahan did best with the Atlanta Falcons. Why all these guys who weren't necessarily great weapons, Mohamed Sanu in Cincinnati wasn't terribly effective. Gabriel in Cleveland wasn't terribly effective, but used in a certain role, they were. And so that's what I like the most about what Kyle Shanahan did there.
Yeah, and Tavon Austin, as an aside, is probably the poster child for the exact opposite of everything we just talked about in Carolina in terms of having no idea whatsoever what to do with a guy who is clearly athletically talented and gifted with the ball in his hand. He's able to make people miss, he's able to make plays, he's got raw speed. The Rams traded up to get this guy, and from day one had no idea what they were going to do with him. And never seemed to get any clearer. They had him for, 4 years at this point, and it didn't seem that at any point in that tenure were they getting a clearer picture of what to do with this guy. Now, some of it, I think, is that he is more limited, and there are some things that you probably couldn't do with him. But, in terms of this Carolina side, the coaching staff going out and getting a firm plan of how to use these guys, the Rams, it seemed, never had any idea of how to use Tavon Austin. And I think that's a big problem. So I think it's a big thing for Carolina. I agree with you. I love Kyle Shanahan's offense. Still do. Hopefully that'll have a big impact on the 49ers, where their offense has been ugly for the past couple of seasons.
Yes,
The team that I really liked last year, the coaching staff of which is, well, maybe not. So I really liked the Bills and what they were doing with Tyrod Taylor and their running game in particular. Whether it was Anthony Lynn as their offensive coordinator and then interim head coach, or Chris Palmer as he had one of those creative titles like the assistant head coach of offense or something. And it's always difficult to know exactly what those guys do.
Greg Roman too.
Yeah, and not necessarily in a bad way, but it's just difficult to entirely ring fence what every guy's responsibility is and how much they're bringing to the table in terms of the stuff that you're seeing on the field. But they were doing some more creative stuff in the run game than almost any other team, maybe with the exception of Carolina, who were doing some of this as well. But you would see, triple option stuff from the Buffalo Bills and, these pistol formations and these kind of stuff that almost breaks, what was breaking our scheme definitions of how we record run concepts. They were running some things that we we weren't able to properly define the way we were doing stuff before. But it was very college centric in terms of these triple option plays. I was looking at one today when I was doing something where they showed counter on the front side and then ran a speed option out of the back side of that, which would completely screw up any linebacker's keys. Those guys are looking for pulling linemen, the movement up front, and the counterplay had the center pulling as opposed to a backside guard. It had motion coming out of the backfield, and then out of the backside of that, Tyrod Taylor takes off on a speed option with a pitch outside of him. So they were just doing so much creative stuff, and unlike the Panthers, because they could just turn Cam Newton loose and let him go, the Bills are prepared to run Tyrod Taylor with the understanding that he's smart enough to take care of himself, because he's not 250 pounds the way Cam Newton is. He's a guy that needs to be smart about how he runs, and but they're prepared to let him do it and basically trust your quarterback to be smart enough to protect himself.
It's crazy how creativity like that also it tends to get rewarded in the NFL. Buffalo led the entire NFL in yards per carry, total yards rushing. Like, it was also very effective, even if their offensive line was never, a top 5, top 10 offensive line for us. They had some struggles, especially on the right side of that line. They weren't great run blockers, but when you get, when you have guys keep defensive linemen playing off balance in terms of what they're looking at, where the ball's going, it tends to work out for the best. And I think we saw that with Buffalo.
And this is again where I think having the coaching staff that's prepared to do this stuff is such a big thing, because everyone just wants to look at Tyrod Taylor and talk about what he can't do and why it's a problem and why he can't ever, why he can't ever win a Super Bowl because of this. And while that's true in certain schemes, if you take him out and it's like the Kaepernick thing. As soon as you took Jim Harbaugh away and you said, right, Kaepernick, now you're going to try and run a West Coast offense, or you're just going to try and run a basic standard pro style offense, full field reads, stay in the pocket, don't take off. That it's automatically setting him up for failure, because that's not what he does well, and that it doesn't let him do the things that he does do well. And it's the same with Tyrod Taylor. If you're going to take away all this rushing threat and just try and turn him into a pocket passer, you're never going to maximize the impact of what he can do. But if you're prepared to do it, and you're prepared to actually say, okay, he does this stuff really well, so let's do more of that, and let's start trying to be a bit more creative with that, you can become the league's best rushing team, instantly. And then all he needs to do is to hold up his end of the bargain from a passing standpoint. And I think he's capable of doing that. And suddenly you've got a team that's way, way better than if you just plugged him into a regular system and said, this is now what you're doing. So people talk about players in isolation in terms of what he's capable of doing, as if every scheme in the NFL is the same. But there's another side of that equation. If you can move the schematic point of things toward what your player does well, then he doesn't need to be, a prototypical West Coast passer, because that's not what you're going to do with him.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And Buffalo's struggles the past 2 years have not been on the offense side of the ball. They've been completely on the defense side of the ball, despite, having Rex Ryan as their defensive-minded coach. They really have had a fairly good offense the past 2 years, good enough to make the playoffs, but the defense has let them down on multiple occasions. There were a couple other teams I wanted to touch on whose offensive schemes I love a lot. The Patriots, obviously, I love the fact that they can basically play any sort of game you want to play. If they want to run up and play power football, they can do that. If they want to spread you out, go 5 wide, they're comfortable doing that for a whole game. Basically, wherever they think your weakness is, they have the personnel and the ability to play that game that'll beat your weakness. So I love that fact about the Patriots. And then the Cardinals, to me, have, despite what Carson Palmer did this past year, Bruce Arians schemes up one of the best vertical, if not the best vertical passing concepts that I've seen. They mesh together so well, and he sets them up early for stuff late, that sort of thing. I think he's a great play caller, and so the Cardinals also probably have one of my favorite passing attacks. Even if the league's moving away from vertical passing to some degree, I still think that they run it extremely well there in Arizona.
Yeah, and that's my only criticism of that scheme, is that, it's also the only thing, well, not the only, it's the thing that I admire about that scheme as well, in that they are a vertical attacking passing offense at a time where nobody else in the league is. Everyone is going the other direction, and they're going, no, this is the way we do things. We're going deep. It's almost like an Al Davis kind of stubbornness that you sort of have to admire. But then the criticism is, ultimately, if everybody else is doing it a different way, it's probably for a reason. And you kind of need a quarterback to be playing at the level Carson Palmer was in 2015 for it to be as successful as it needs to be, I guess. So that's my only real criticism of that. The Patriots thing, I agree 100% on, and I think you can extend that to the defensive side of the ball for them as well. They sort of deserve talking about, because they're the only team in the league, I think, that is prepared to go completely week to week, game plan to game plan, and be entirely different than they were the week before. You'll see some teams go into a game with a specific game plan and have certain things that they want to lean on in that game. But you don't see teams do what the Patriots do, which is lurch from complete scheme to complete scheme and back again in the space of a couple of weeks, entirely dependent on the team they're going to come up and face. Because most teams aren't even close to having the personnel required to do that. But the Patriots are. And the other thing that they have going for them is that offensive scheme, in terms of being able to basically run the exact same plays out of completely different formations and personnel packages, which is a really smart way of doing it. I'm kind of surprised that more teams haven't adopted that successfully.
Yeah, there's just so much to like about what New England does offensively. I've written tons of stuff about their passing offense, their pass defense, but there's a reason why they seem to cycle players throughout this past 15 years. But what doesn't change is the fact that they pass the ball well, they stop the pass well. It's the schematic aspect.
No, I'm a big fan of their offense and defense in terms of that scheme. I think it's interesting because it is so unique, and just other teams don't even attempt to do it because it's so difficult. But the idea that you can go game plan by game plan, week to week, with this, well, with the defense and with this Erhard Perkins offensive system, I think is fascinating.
Yep, that's it for the scheme talk. We'll touch on maybe some defensive ones next week. I know we touched on the Patriots, but we'll do that with the other side of the ball here in a week or so. Let's get into some segments though, and our favorite segment. I stole it from you last week, Sam, because you weren't here. The What Grinds My Gears segment. I said that there was no. It upset me that there's no NFL anything right now, and no developmental league at all, or anything for me to watch. So that's what was grinding my gears. What is grinding yours this week, Sam?
You had a good one at the start of this as well. You're getting into the swing of things. I was thinking I didn't have too much earlier when you first gave me the itinerary for this podcast.
The visa got you in a good mood.
It did, and then the visa immediately gave me something to grind my gears about. This is the beauty of this thing. So I had nothing going, and then I started filling in the latest form that I have to fill in, which informed me that it was going to be an average of 75 minutes to fill in this form. There has never in the entire history of humanity
SATs
been the need for a 75-minute long form. Especially when almost all of the information I'm putting down is stuff that I've already given them to get this visa okayed. So they already have this info somewhere in the system, but for whatever reason, it's easier for them to make me fill it out again over 75 minutes than it is for them to just access it. So yeah, ridiculously long, pointless forms are what's grinding my gears right now. Not a tremendously football-centric grinding my gears, I'll grant you, but that's what I've got.
I'm going to expound on yours. You touched on one thing that grinds my gears, and it's the fact that when you've already given someone, some information about yourself or something, but for some reason they need it again in a different form, the repetitive inputting of, where people can't store your data effectively to where you need to input the same stuff again, just in a different form, that definitely grinds my gears. I don't know about the 75-minute form, never had to do one of those, but when I have to repeatedly give you the same info because you didn't store it correctly, that makes me upset.
Yeah, or just different departments within the same organization. These guys have it. Just get it from them. Why do you need? I've already given you this. Find it yourself.
Exactly. All right, let's keep it moving to another segment here. Explain this, some NFL concept that we'll try to break down for you guys. And today it is the slide in pass protection. So Sam, you've gone on offensive lineman podcast. You're deep in that realm. So what is the slide in pass protection?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost self-evident, really. When you think of pass protection, it's all about making sure you got a man on a man in terms of the number of defensive guys that are coming. Part of that pre-snap is guesswork to a degree because teams are very good at disguising who's rushing and who's not, and threatening the line of scrimmage with more guys than they're planning on sending and all that kind of thing. So at some point, the offense has to decide exactly how they're picking this up. And it's done, by numbers. And you can either slide the entire offensive line one way or the other to try and pick up the number of guys coming. Or you can do it with just half the offensive line sliding one direction to try and pick up guys. And then you fill in the sort of the additional guys from the other side, either with the running back or the unblocked rusher that's left at that side is the quarterback has to throw hot on. So if you have an unblocked outside linebacker steaming down on you from the right side, typically you have some kind of pass route that's very quick off that side that you can just throw straight over his head into the space he's just vacated, while the entire line is sliding in one direction to put a big guy on a big guy and pick up all the rushes.
Yeah, usually if you have, usually there's like a point on the line where, it's center over right guard, from the right guard to the left, all slides one way, And the people that aren't on the slide, the opposite side, so say the center, left guard and left tackle all slide left, then the right guard and right tackle usually have a certain man they're assigned to. So the left side of the line, the sign that's sliding to the left, is kind of zone blocking in terms of on stunts and stuff. You're picking up whoever comes into your area, whereas the other side has to block they have certain men that they're actually assigned to at that point. So probably the most common form when using slides is how that works. So off to the line talk. Good O-line talk there.
They must love it when we talk this stuff.
Oh man, the cool clinic was this past week, and since actually Steve talked at it. I'm not sure what he talked
giving
about.
A presentation.
But yeah, Steve gave a presentation at an O-line clinic. So I would love to. I wish I could have been there. Last thing here, some historical power rankings in the news this week. Tom Brady was asked if he was the greatest quarterback of all time. Said he did not agree with that statement. So we're gonna rank the best quarterbacks of all time to see if Tom Brady was correct or if he was incorrect. So Sam, why don't you
hang on? Who did Tom Brady say was?
He just said he didn't agree. I don't think he gave a name.
Just I'm not the greatest. End.
He didn't. Just went politically correct. Try to not ruffle any feathers. It was basically the response he gave. But
well, that's crappy. So my thing about this has always been, I just don't see how you can compare across eras.
It's so ridiculous to even compare Joe Montana to anyone today.
And exactly.
And that's 20 years ago.
What I've done is I have 4 quarterbacks that I think were unquestionably the greatest quarterback of their era and seem to have been unanimous in terms of that decision. Everyone agrees that those guys were the greatest until the next greatest came along and just seemed to supersede them only through recency bias. It's not like... So the first one, I think you go all the way back to Otto Graham from the Cleveland Browns, back when the Cleveland Browns were good and just laying waste to everything in front of them. Graham.
You watched a lot of Cleveland Browns tape from back then.
They actually put up all of the 1950s championship games somewhere. And I watched, I think, every single 1950s championship game. So yeah, I've actually seen a reasonable amount of Otto Graham. But
so I look like an idiot. Yeah.
When you look at his career highlights and achievements and all this kind of stuff, I mean, it's ridiculous. Tom Brady's ever-growing list of championships and accolades and all this kind of stuff is impressive. But this is just the Wikipedia part of Otto Graham's career highlights and awards. 3-time NFL champion, 50, 54, and 55. And this is before, so there's also a whole previous section of this where the Browns were just destroying the, what was that called? The AAFC, whatever that stood for, something American Football Championship, before they were admitted into the NFL. So they won that. He basically won 10 straight NFL championships, or championship games, I think. So 3-time NFL champion, 5-time Pro Bowl, 4-time All-Pro, second team All-Pro again, so that's 5 total All-Pros. 3 times NFL MVP, 2-time NFL passing yards leader, passing touchdown leader in 52, 4-time AAFC champion, 3-time first team All AAFC, 2-time AAFC MVP, NFL 1950s All-Decade Team, NFL 75th Anniversary Team, retired number 14 for the Browns, then Big Ten Player of the Year, 1943, big one.
Nice.
First team All-American, first team All-Big Ten. This guy's numbers and accolades and achievements were just ridiculous. They won at an absolutely obscene level in terms of everything they went out for. He basically won a championship. So he was unquestionably the greatest winning quarterback ever before Tom Brady came along. I think purely because you're not supposed to be able to do what the Patriots and Tom Brady have done in this era. But for the 50s and the 40s, Otto Graham was the guy. Then I think you get up to Johnny Unitas, Johnny Football. When he retired, the original Johnny Football, when he retired, everybody immediately agreed that this was the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. There was no question about it until we got into sort of true modern era guys. He was just 3-time NFL champion, 10-time Pro Bowler, five first team All Pros, another 2 second team, 3-time MVP. Ridiculous. Like, his numbers were obscene in terms of the time. 290 touchdown passes. I think he was the kind of the Peyton Manning of his time in terms of setting ridiculous cumulative career numbers. So I think he was the sort of the 1960s guy. Then I think you get up to Joe Montana. Joe Montana was basically Tom Brady before Tom Brady was Tom Brady. The only difference is he did it in a time where it was actually possible to create a dynasty of a franchise in terms of roster management. You know, there wasn't the free agency that there is today. You could really stockpile a roster. They had Joe Montana and Steve Young as his backup for years in San Francisco. So Joe Montana was definitely steering more of a juggernaut than Tom Brady was, but he also just didn't lose. You know, the Tom Brady has got losses in the Super Bowl and in big playoff games. Joe Montana really doesn't. I mean, his playoff record is obscene. His his CV, his resume in terms of big pressure moments, there just aren't many where he doesn't turn up big. And even at the end of his career, where they ultimately cast him off San Francisco, said, look, we can't keep Steve Young sitting on the bench any longer. We've got another Hall of Fame quarterback that we can come in and do this. They basically kicked him to the curb. He went to Kansas City and then comes back and beats the dynastic 49ers with the Chiefs. So I think he has everything in terms of the career highlights you want from that. And I think the modern era greatest is Tom Brady. I think this last Super Bowl comeback is a big part of that. Him and Peyton Manning, I think, is really, really close. But the last couple of years of what Tom Brady has done, basically since I suggested he was declining, not that I'm taking credit for that, but since that moment, he has basically come back and reinforced his case to be the greatest and distanced himself, I think, from Manning in that regard in terms of having, you know, one of the greatest seasons of his career again. This most recent year was arguably the greatest season of his career. He doesn't look like he's declining anymore. Certainly not the way we saw Peyton Manning just hit a cliff at the end of his career. And then ultimately one of the greatest Super Bowl comebacks in NFL history to add to the resume in terms of rings and all that kind of stuff that people love. So as much as I think for the majority of their careers, I think I would have lent Peyton Manning as the best. It's tough to make that case now.
See, I have a different take on what makes someone the best of all time. I think it's at your peak.
Oh, nice.
What were you? Because I don't, while, you know, longevity is great and, you know, that's perfectly fine. But I think what separates guys from me is what did they do at their absolute best? Who was their best season? What did that look like? And to me, Peyton Manning's best was better than Tom Brady's best.
Yeah, I could buy that. But it does have to last like a season. You got to see at least 1 year out of it.
Oh no, yeah, I'm not saying like one game is obviously Matt Flynn is not a top 5 quarterback for me.
Okay, I like that. So what do we end up with as a top 5 if that's your criteria?
So it goes. It's very much recency bias.
I was going to say, and how far back in time do we go with this?
Peyton Manning number 1 then.
Okay.
Tom Brady number 2. Aaron Rodgers number 3. Dan Marino number 4.
Damn.
Joe Montana number 5.
Okay. I don't know. I think I would be inclined to say that Aaron Rodgers is at his best would be number 1.
Yeah, I mean, that one was close to me. Those all three all three put up seasons that were ridiculous. Rodgers probably has the single best one. Brady has 2 or 3 that are up there. Manning has 2 that really stand out. I think the overall resume maybe weighed just enough to push Manning Brady ahead of Rodgers. But I mean, Rodgers with a few more years, if he continues, because Rodgers really had some lows though in there.
Yeah.
That 2015 was awful. Like that doesn't really. You didn't see Brady or Manning the past handful of years have those just until Manning actually went down the tube. So
one of the things I will say that Peyton Manning will definitely not get enough credit for as time waves on, and especially I think because of the way his career ended, where it really did just fall off a cliff and went out with a whimper, albeit a Super Bowl winning whimper. Um, Being able to basically reteach himself how to play the game on the fly when he realized that physically he was no longer capable of playing it the way he did for a decade is one of the greatest sporting feats I have ever seen in any sport. It is absolutely ridiculous to ask a guy to basically rewire his muscle memory on the fly in the course of an NFL season, and that's exactly what he did when he came back and started to play for the Broncos. This is a guy who we didn't know if he was going to be able to come back at all because of the state of his arm and that the state of his body post neck surgery. And there were all these reports coming out of working out in private because he didn't want to see people actually have him throw the ball because of how terrible it was. And then I think the second game he played for the Broncos, maybe against Atlanta, threw 3 interceptions in the first quarter. All 3 of them were basically the same pass that he'd made a career out of in Indianapolis, this deep seam route down the middle of the field, and he just can't throw that ball anymore. The arm wasn't there. There was no zip on it, and the ball just hung in the air for an eternity, and it was game over. It was like, okay. So he had this realization basically in the first quarter of that game, I can't attempt that pass anymore, like ever. It's just gone. So he had to completely change how he played the game and move from where that was one of his staple weapons. That was one of the best things that he did. Suddenly that's a pass that he basically could never attempt again in the NFL, and he had to figure out how to play at a ridiculously high level with everything else. If I take out this, what do I have to add back in to still be effective? To do that, with the course of an offseason, having planning and schematics and that kind of thing would be a challenge. To do it in the middle of a game and then from that point on in the season is absolutely ridiculous. And I don't think he's going to get enough credit for doing that. But that is a truly remarkable thing that I don't think you'll ever see anybody else do again.
No, I agree. And also, I think what gets lost with Manning is the fact that he was putting up ridiculous numbers before the sort of boom of passing offense, before the rules changed to make it much easier on offenses. If you just compare his numbers from about 2000 to 2006 to guys like Drew Brees, Tom Brady, other guys in that era, he is utterly dominant comparatively. He had put up great numbers even back then, and then once passing offenses started to develop into what we see today, and everyone's putting up 4,000 yards a year, his numbers don't look nearly as good. But back then, he was, far and away the cream of the crop.
Yeah, that's the big thing in Dan Marino's favor as well. Dan Marino put up a 5,000-yard season in 1984, and that was his second year in the league. This is a sophomore NFL quarterback putting up 5,000 yards in an era when nobody had come close to doing that before. Like, now, 5,000 yards is relatively regular. I think there's been, 10 of them or something now? Most of them have been Drew Brees, but still, there's still only, I think, 5 quarterbacks that had ever thrown for 5,000 yards, and all of them, I think, have been, post 2000 and whatever it was, where Brees first broke broke 5,000. Marino did it in 1984. That's not just a little bit before 2000, before the passing boom. It's decades before that. It was just shouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, but that's what you mentioned and why I think I like your rankings better than mine. It's basically comparing eras is silly.
Yeah.
This whole exercise is, an exercise in futility if you're comparing anyone that didn't play in the exact same time period, because there's really no chance of even getting anywhere close to a barometer of what someone like Peyton Manning would have looked like playing in 1984.
I do like your idea though of defining greatness by what a guy was able to do at his best, because the thing that I have a real issue with when it comes to Hall of Fame debates and all that kind of stuff is guys that were just accumulators. I don't have a huge amount of respect for durability as a greatness barometer. You just manage to hang around long enough to rack up big enough numbers that you're suddenly automatically in the Hall of Fame. That doesn't do a whole amount for me. I have far more time for a Kurt Warner story or a Terrell Davis story, a Gale Sayers story, than a guy who just hung on for 15 years and therefore is one of the top 5 guys statistically in his position all time.
Oh yeah, I hate that. Yeah, I definitely agree. That happens a lot more in baseball, I feel like. But just because you played, like you said, 20 years and if you never were a top 3 guy at your position, if you never were the guy, never were a dominant player, I have no sort of sympathy for you not getting in the Hall of Fame. I don't, there's no argument for you. I just think you have to be great at your best or else you don't belong in that conversation.
The number one thing for me in terms of Hall of Fame credentials would be, were you at any point the best player in the league at your position? And if the answer to that is no, unless you were playing at the same time as a Jerry Rice, then you're not in the Hall of Fame. Like
someone like Frank Gore, if you're arguing for Frank Gore as a Hall of Famer, I don't really respect your argument, because he's going to have great career stats, but at any point was he even close to a top 3 running back?
If you're not the best guy in the league at your position, you better have been playing your career better have overlapped exactly with a guy who's unquestionably one of the greatest players of all time, like a Jerry Rice or a Barry Sanders. So Barry Sanders and Emmitt Smith, their careers pretty much overlapped. So if you're saying, maybe you could easily make the argument that at no point in his career was Emmitt Smith better than Barry Sanders. But it would be pretty harsh to eliminate him from the Hall of Fame because of that. Mm-hmm. So, that I think is the caveat to that. But otherwise, if those guys played in different eras, and you're saying that at no point was this guy the best guy in his position, you're not a Hall of Famer. You're a Hall of Very Good, which is, laudable, and you got paid well and you got Pro Bowls for it, but it doesn't put you in the Hall of Fame in my eyes.
Yep. Oh man, we agreed on far too much of today's
I know. I was worrying.
Podcast. That got weird. We'll disagree more next week. So that's it for us today, though. Hope you enjoyed it. We will talk to you. Who's on who are we interviewing later in the week, Sam?
This week, I think, is the kind of the early core team that Steve is going to talk to. It's the Ben Stockwells, it's Khaled, I think he's getting Ian on there, Ian is going to be worth the price of admission all by himself. Ian is our IT guy who started off and knew absolutely nothing about football, now knows a little bit more, but still comically little about football. So that, I think, should be entertaining just in and of itself.
Yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be the late week podcast. And like I said, we'll talk to you guys again next week. Have a good one.